A lot of times people think, say, marketing, oh, it's a numbers game. I say, okay, it's a people game, right? So if you want to actually show curiosity and interest in like what they're doing, what they're working on, and making it about them, then you can find people who are willing to share. And then from there, you can figure out if there's a way to kind of provide them some value.
Yeah. Hey there, pros. Welcome to another episode of the Passionate Pro podcast. As you know, I'm Megan Boson, the Passionate Pro. And at the Passionate Pro, we believe that work does not have to be unpleasant, and you can bring your passion to work. Today, we're going to talk with Colin Simon, and he's going to take us through his journey. You're going to learn from it. I'm going to be inspired by it, and I can't wait to get into it. So here we go. Hey, Colin, thanks so much for being with us.
Pleasure to be here.
Very glad to have you. Now, the first question, always on the podcast, you got the cowboy boots on. I haven't had anybody with cowboy boots. I want to hear the story behind the cowboy boots.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so these are Tacovas. The brand's called Tacovas, and I got them because I was in a wedding party, and the groom for all the groomsmen gave us gift cards to buy cowboy boots, and that's what we wore with our suits at the wedding.
That's a cool look. Like,
yeah, it was a good look.
Yeah.
I didn't think about it, but it was like actually really cool with pictures and things like that. And now they're like some of my favorite shoes because one, I never really owned cowboy boots, but they're very comfortable. You slip them on, you don't have to worry about tying anything. And they're always a good memory of like how I got them.
Yeah.
Good story. So.
Well, the other thing about cowboy boots I found is they're way more versatile than you realize. Like you can dress them up, dress them down.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, so I have some colleagues and they have like snakeskin. I want to say he has like an alligator or a fish skin boot. It's like these crazy things. And so the boots probably cost more than my sneakers.
Yeah, they were pretty expensive, but I got them as a gift. But
That's
I agree
cool,
with
though.
you. I never owned them before, but I've realized how versatile they are, and you can wear them in so many different ways.
That's cool. All right, so tell us a little bit about yourself. What are you up to these days?
Sure. So I navigated a career that I'm sure we can get into, but where I'm at right now is I help people get a lot of value out of LinkedIn.
All right. I think some people just leaned in a lot closer, and for the purpose of the camera, I won't, but I'm very interested.
Yeah. So I started my own boutique e-commerce agency where I help people navigate systems management, digital marketing, project management. So I manage different websites, and a niche within that was LinkedIn.
Wow.
It was kind of, I found the portal to help a lot of people grow their brand online. So I would do other things in terms of building systems, but like it always starts with how do you share your story? And LinkedIn is a great place to kind of anchor in, what the story is, what your offer is, what's the call to action that you're trying to get from people, to at least set that up and help people like figure out their messaging and positioning. And then you can kind of grow systems out of that. And I found that like when I was helping people with systems, when they didn't really know their story, it found it kind of hard to build them a website or work through all the more complex things. So I like to say, well, why don't we just start with your LinkedIn profile?
Okay, so that sounds like a very, you niche down and then niche down and then niche down again, right?
Yeah.
Is this where you started your career in the tech space?
No. So I feel like the best place is maybe to peel back and say like how I got there.
Yeah.
So I actually went to law school in Atlanta, Georgia State College of Law. Yeah.
Okay.
So I graduated from college in 2009, and that was when the recession happened.
Yeah.
And I knew myself well enough at that point to know that I liked school, and I felt like if I got a job that I didn't really like, I didn't know if I was going to excel at the job. So it was hard to get jobs at that point.
Yeah.
So I decided that I took the LSAT. I did well. I got into Georgia State. I was out of state for undergrad at University of Michigan. And so part of me wanted to come back to Atlanta and live in Atlanta and have that experience. So I did that. And what I realized while I was at law school was I don't really want to practice law.
Wait a minute. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, that's kind of important.
Yeah, it was important. And it was a transition. I would say that there was a couple different milestones where I kind of came to that realization. The first milestone was after my first year of law school, I had an internship working at the courthouse, Fulton County.
Yeah.
And I was excited for it going into the
I think you picked the wrong county is what happened,
maybe,
Colin.
Maybe. Well, you know, part of it is one story was everybody, like I was there and I met like a lot of great people throughout the summer, and everybody's claim to fame was where they were when there was an incident that happened a couple of years before at the Fulton County Courthouse where
Yes.
it was bad. And so everybody was talking about it that summer, and me, as like kind of like still figuring out my career, I was like, I can't work in an environment where everybody talks about like murder.
Yeah, in a devastating event.
Yeah, devastating things.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of sadness, I felt like, within the courtroom, even kind of seeing people that are going through a lot of hardship. And obviously there's a lot of value in what lawyers do, but I kind of started to realize about myself that maybe this isn't the profession, career that I was looking for. And when I got back to school for my second year, and I kind of started talking to all my colleagues, everybody was talking about what they did over the summer, and they were excited. They say, I'm upset that we're back in school. I want to go back to that work.
So they were ready to do the work, right?
They were
School was
excited.
just a means to the end.
Yeah.
And for you, you were like, oh man, like that was not my experience at all.
I was excited that was over and I get to go back to being a student. Because I actually liked being a student, the lifestyle of a student, learning. So that was, I think, kind of the first opening to say, well, maybe I don't like the practice of law as much, and I might need to kind of think through what it is that I like.
Yeah.
And so that kind of started the exploration to kind of ask myself some different questions about like what it is that I like and what I like to do.
So did you finish out law school?
Yeah.
You wait a minute. I just want to make sure I understand.
Yeah.
So you have this realization that, number one, because you had said, if I'm doing something that I don't enjoy, I probably won't excel at it. And excelling is important to you.
Mm-hmm.
And then this environment is not going to be for me. But you finished law school. Why didn't you just drop out? Like, okay, I'm just going to go find something else.
That's a good question. I think that there's some value in the schooling process on trying to like get your degree and like finish what you started. Because I feel like I always felt like I was learning interesting stuff. I just didn't like the practice of it. And also the way law school is structured is the first year is by far the hardest. Most people kind of know that. Yeah, because it's, you have to take the majority, you don't have any wiggle room in terms of like picking electives of things that might interest you your first year. Everything is standard.
Yeah.
And so after your first year, once you go through that, the second year, you're allowed to start kind of branching out into some different avenues and learning some things that you might find more interesting.
Got it.
Like that year, I started doing that. So for example, for me, I was interested in maybe like intellectual property, copyrights, trademarks, things that I had a little bit more of like, how is the law applied in a more creative environment?
So then years 2 and 3 for you were more about self-enrichment and personal development and growth. You were like, hey, I'm in an environment where I can grow, I can learn some cool stuff, and I'll finish out. So you go on, you graduate law school.
Yeah, I graduated from law school. I took the bar.
You took the bar.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, I felt like at that point I was revved up because knowing that I was gonna realistically shift careers. Okay. Right. So I felt like for me, passing the bar was kind of the culmination of the purpose of trying to go through all of that. Also just to kind of like add to the mix is like I had a lot of like life hit me with a lot of like hardship in law school. Like I felt like I had a really nice life up to about 22, and then like life has a cruel way of kind of like pulling the rug out from under you. So I felt like there was a lot of things that were happening with law school that gave me that personal like journey of trying to figure out like how to shift from like survival mode to like thrive mode, right?
So for you early on in your 20s, which I think most people, we would all agree, like 20s, that's really early. You had kind of to recalibrate your life in the way that you looked at and thought about your values and what was important to you and how you were going to have your focus.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and I'm not even trying to be cryptic. Like my parents got divorced at that time. My friends, one of my best friends from college got diagnosed with like terminal cancer.
Oh, wow.
My grandparents had to move to Atlanta because they weren't doing well. My parents were in the middle of a divorce, so it became chaotic.
Life stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was life. It was chaos and just trying to get through it
Yeah.
while also going to law school, which was hard.
Its own stress.
Yeah, and I remember I remember vividly being in that environment where it was just like you go through the day and you're like, I don't think anybody would want to do like anything that I did like all day. I don't even want to do anything I did, and I got to do it all again tomorrow.
Yeah,
you know? And it's like I feel like everyone has those periods of life, but like that's what changed it for me, because it was like I got to find something that I like to do.
Yeah.
Right. That's the goal. I want to be like happy with like what I'm doing, and I'm not happy with what I'm doing, but I feel like I'm in the right place for what I need to do right now. Right. Because being a student too also gives you a nice balanced life.
It does.
Right.
Yeah.
On a day-to-day level, because you know what your responsibilities are. And then you're, at least in law school, like aiming for like passing the test at the end. Right. It's not like homework based.
Yeah.
So for me, I was like, okay, I can get through this,
Right.
and let me pass the bar and kind of have an end goal, and then I can put it behind me and like jump to what's next.
So what was next?
So I booked a one-way ticket to New York, packed
Why
a
New York?
suitcase. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do at that point. I felt like New York job market has probably the most opportunities.
Okay.
And then also a lot of my friends from college were either there or like moving there around the same time. So for a lot of reasons, it just seemed that like New York was the best option to try to figure it out.
So for you were looking and you're like, you know what? This is a place that has a support network for me.
Yeah.
And I can move there. And so it gives me some leeway in order to find myself and find things. But people that care about me and that I care about are already there.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
I had a network there. And then also I was at that point interested in exploring technology.
Okay.
I made that decision. You know, I remember being in law school and was looking out at like reading a lot of stories about Facebook's growth at that time and some of like the software young people building, creating, and I was drawn to that type of environment. That looked fun, creative, collaborative, everything that the law realized the practice of law was not. And so I wanted that, and I felt like New York was the best place with my support network to try to figure out what I could accomplish there. So I had a finite amount of money. I, within 3 months, was able to kind of figure out getting a job, which was a big land.
So I want to talk about that a little bit, because one of the things that folks and I, talk about is when you go through this, and at this point, if I'm listening to you, you've kind of recalibrated and rethought your life 2 or 3 times, right? And you're what, 25, 26?
Yeah, exactly.
Something like that, right? Moving to a new city, you've got a support network, you're clear on what's important to you, and you found this passion around technology.
Yeah.
Was the first job in the technology space, or was it like, hey, I'm going to run out of money. Like, if I got to be the guy with the hot dog cart on the corner, I'm going to do that?
No, I actually wound up getting really lucky, where I got a job within about 3 months working at a boutique e-commerce agency.
Get out.
Yeah, it didn't pay great, but it was like a regular like project manager.
Yeah.
Building websites for retail brands, and like it was like a boutique little New York.
Yeah.
And so I went on a lot of different interviews, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I networked and met with different people to kind of see what was out there. And when I got this job, it felt right. Look, in the interview process, where I was like, I feel like I could be good at this. I didn't know anything about technology, but my role was more focused on managing client services and then managing the developers on the other side. So like intaking requests and then managing the operations associated with building websites.
So is that what got you, because you said technology, and for a lot of people, right, technology, and then you said Facebook, and they're like, okay, social media, right?
Sure.
And so, but for you, it was like, there's a big technology space. I don't know necessarily where in that space I'll go, but, and I would say, I don't know, I'll ask you this question. Do you think it was luck, or do you think that you were so clear on what you wanted to do that you put enough irons in that fire that something just kind of took hold for you?
That's a great question. I would say it's a balance of both, right? Because I was doing a lot of internal reflection over the years that I was so unhappy that I did have a lot of thought into it. And so I felt like I said, when I started that job, I felt like it was right, right? Because I wasn't like, look, at that point, I was making like like 100% less than all the lawyers, right? So it's like all of like my like law school friends are they're cashing in. That's what you do in the law.
Yeah.
You go and then all of a sudden you're making all this money. And for me, that was I was making like $50,000,
Yeah.
right? But I was so happy because I could afford rent. I figured it out. I was working in Soho in New York. I got an apartment with friends in the West Village, so it all worked out. So to go from I don't know if this is going to work out to like, hey, this is working out. For me, I was ecstatic. Like it was unbelievable. And I enjoyed the day-to-day because all of a sudden I was in a creative environment. Like I was with people that were young. And what I really love about that world was the problem with law that I had was that you would go to a law firm or you would go to the courthouse and there might be diversity in like ethnicity, but not that much diversity in terms of like personality types.
Yeah.
Everyone there kind of wants to be a professional student.
Yeah.
And I felt like I didn't want to be a professional student. And I felt like the outsider. I loved working collaboratively with people that are like totally different than me, that are interested in different things.
Yeah.
I can learn from. And that's what this environment was, because now all of a sudden you're managing clients who you can kind of look up to in different ways. That are creative and like operators, and then you're working with engineers who are a different breed, but like super smart. And I don't know anything about technology or websites. So like every ticket you get to work on with somebody, you're learning, and some are better than others. You realize like the distinctions between different types of engineers.
Yeah.
So for me, it was all new, it was all exciting, and I loved it.
So when I heard you use the word, you were ecstatic.
Yeah.
You're living in New York. And you know, I have family in New York. We visited a lot when I was a kid. I haven't been back probably in probably 8 years or so. But when you say $50,000 in New York, it's like, oh my gosh, you were impoverished, right?
Yeah.
But you said you were ecstatic.
Yeah.
You loved what you were doing. And I think one of the things that we can take for granted is how doing the work that is important to you can cover a multitude of the things that sometimes we've been led to believe are important, right?
Yeah.
For happiness, right? And I think, you know, people say it all the time, right? Money does not bring happiness, not in and of itself. And so you're in this environment, you've got some roommates who are friends of yours.
Yeah.
So likely you're having fun in your free time as well.
Yeah.
Now I do want to, if you can kind of give us your definition, want to make sure everybody understands what e-commerce is.
Sure. Yeah, it's the nature of selling things online.
Yeah.
So that might be products or services. You need a website to be able to do that. And so this was in 2012 to 2015. At that point in time, it was a little bit harder, a little bit more heavy lifting, because you needed, they didn't have like, for example, Shopify, which I'm sure you heard of, right?
Sure.
So it's like there's a lot of software out there that makes the ability to sell products or services online incredibly ezy today.
Yeah.
But at that point, brands were still paying for like e-commerce agencies to do it for them. And in New York, a lot of big brands wanted to work with like boutiques so they could get a little bit more hand-holding, a little bit more design. So that was what this was.
So it's more like really bespoke solutions, right? It wasn't kind of like you said, like now, right? There are templates, right?
Yeah.
And there's a certain degree of it that, you know.
So the brands that we were working on was Rock Nation.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, we're talking like big brands in New York. To Exist, Danskin.
Yes.
You know, they were big. They were big brands. But these brands want to work. I'm sure that they probably do it all in house now because it's gotten a lot easier. Of e-commerce, and every business knows at this point that that's something to really like own. But at that point, people were still figuring it out.
Okay.
Social media didn't really have advertising just yet. So the website was really the portal for the brand. So they needed like a content management system to be able to allow their marketers the ability to set up web pages. You know, they had creative ideas that they needed people to execute. And that was kind of where I stood in between the brand and the developers, where we were the execution role. So it was creative. I learned a lot. I got to go, I remember one time like our Christmas party was at like the 40/40 Club, like Jay-Z's.
Get out,
you know,
really?
so it was like fun.
Yeah.
It was like exciting.
You're
to be
with your people, right?
It was just like
fun.
fun.
Right?
And like I didn't experience anything like that when I was in law school. And to be fair, I don't think a lot of the people I was with wanted to.
Right. They would that invite to them would have been like, oh man, I can't believe I have to go to this thing.
Yeah.
And I have nothing to wear. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So how long were you with this particular organization?
So I was there for about 4.5 to 5 years.
Okay.
So what happened was a couple of things. One, in that world, agency world, if you're ecstatic, then they pile on work. Because that's kind of the nature of like, oh, you're good, here's more work.
Well, it's the reward for good work, right?
Sure.
Which is
so I had a
work.
lot of clients, a lot of work, a lot of things were breaking because things weren't as stable in like the technology sector as I feel like now. So it was a lot of kind of high stress. A lot of information was living in my head. So whenever there was an issue, you had to kind of be on call to say like, well, what changed? How do we fix it?
Sure.
So I was working a lot. It got to the point where it got pretty repetitive for me. And then also I'm still kind of learning, doing my personal development stuff. You know, at that point I was actually, I told you that my friend who got diagnosed with cancer, he was in New York and he wound up passing away when I was 28. So I saw the trajectory at this point, and this is now during that time that I started kind of closing in on 30. And I would say, you know, I had at that point my own apartment.
Yeah.
And things were going well. And from 25 at the end of law school to where I was at that point, like when I was like thinking about leaving that job, I accomplished all my goals. And for everything we're talking about, I was happy. But this is where it kind of switched to me because I felt very unfulfilled.
Oh, so as I'm listening to you, it sounds a little bit like the burnout started to happen, right?
Yeah.
You're working a ton of hours. You reach a point of stagnation, right?
Yeah.
Where you've accomplished what you came there to accomplish.
Yeah.
One of the things that you've already said that's important to you is being able to learn and do different things. And now that's not happening because you've gotten all the juice from this, right? That you can.
Yeah, and also like you're working in a startup and you kind of realize that you're not really it's not your company, so like you know you're beholden to like what's available, right?
Yeah.
And so I started thinking, okay, well, what's the next chapter? And so for me, I wound up getting a job at Bloomingdales, which was more on the corporate side. So at that point in my career, I was like, okay, do the law school stuff. I've had this great experience managing developers and managing all these clients. What if I like took my talents now to a brand and saw how they navigated e-commerce and, you know, take my talents that I've learned to them.
Let me ask you this, right? So you've come in, you've worked at a startup. Was your thinking at that point in time that you would start your own thing later and you wanted to see a different side of it?
Probably not consciously, but subconsciously, I think a little bit.
Yeah.
A little bit. I always kind of had this feeling, even when I was in law school, that if I could just I still feel this way to an extent, that like, as long as I keep getting better, then eventually I'll figure out how to do something to like make money or like do my own thing. But at that point, it was just a matter of like, how do you get better at your craft? Like, how do you just get better? And I needed more exposure because I saw I felt like I was ready for corporate at that time, to be honest.
But that's like, I don't want to glaze over that point because that's such a big thing that I think a lot of people struggle with, which is, you know, the first part being, how do you turn your passion into profit?
Yeah.
Right. But it sounds like for you, you were like, look, as long as I can take my passion and make sure that I'm the expert at it, I learn everything there is to know about it, then the profit part will come.
Absolutely. I'm a big proponent of that. I know a lot of people don't think that way, but that was always my strategy, where it was, I'm the vehicle. I got to get better. So could I figure it out on the fly? Like as an entrepreneur? Sure. But like why, in my opinion, if I could get like trained and see how other people are navigating it.
Yeah. So you go to Bloomingdales.
Yeah, so I went to Bloomingdales, and that was a blessing as well. I'm a big proponent for people, like I think people in our world right now are just like against jobs. You know what I mean?
You're not gonna get me to respond to that, Colin.
That's fine. But like, I have my own business now, but like that was actually a really magical period in my life. I put like a lot of, I give a lot of thanks to that training to kind of see how they were navigating these complex projects, right? Like Macy's and Bloomingdale's were intertwined on the e-commerce side. their operations are probably the most complicated other than like Amazon in the country.
Wow.
Because, you know, they're shipping all over the place. And it's also, you learn a lot through failure. And let's just say like they're failing a little bit in this world. So, but that doesn't mean that the people that are in control of it are not smart, not trying to turn it around, don't have good ideas. So like to be able to be part of that cycle and see how these people were, and at that point I'm still the young one. Nobody's looking at me to fix the ship. I'm just like a role player.
Yeah.
So I actually found that to be kind of a nice experience where like for the first time after a long time of like agency and law school, like no one was looking for me to be the leader. It was more of like I got to be a role player and learn a lot through what they were doing, which I felt like allowed me to start thinking and have creative freedom to start thinking, what do I want to do? Like as a side hustle.
So now that brings us kind of to where we are now, right? So you've got this very robust foundation with a lot of things, but you've definitely started to go deep in this e-commerce space. So you and I were talking before at this point in time, you know, COVID and everything, and you move back to Atlanta.
Yeah.
And then, so do you move to Atlanta and put up your shingle simultaneously like, hey, I'm going to go do this e-commerce thing on LinkedIn?
No. So what happened was I stayed at Bloomingdales for 5 years. I was there during COVID. And what happened was corporate life is a little boring because you have a lot of free time. Now, sometimes that could be a curse or it could be a blessing. For me, I made it into a blessing because I used my time productively. I started networking on LinkedIn in my free time. I was at my desk, nobody knew what I was doing, and I would just be chatting it up with people and building up my own network. At that point, I kind of saw some things within LinkedIn that I felt like I could become good at this because I was able to open up conversations with strangers, transition them into like a conference room at Bloomingdales, and just like chat with them and see if I could sell something.
Wow.
Yeah. And I got a lot of no's.
That's a unique talent, right?
Yeah,
so
but you know, that's what I'm saying. It's a blessing and curse. No one told me that I had to do that, but like, you know, I had the time and I wanted to meet interesting people. And at that point, this is like 2018, like people were responsive. So people were like willing to get on a quick call, like a networking chat.
Yeah.
So you can meet like CEOs, like older people who are like doing interesting things, and they would say yes to me.
Has that changed?
Yeah, it changed at COVID. Which is also when I wound up kind of quitting my job to kind of answer your question, because I saw it shift. Because I was the guy for 2 years before that, you know, sharpening my sword, trying to convince people to work with me on Zoom. And I got a lot of no's. People would be like, why would I do that? Or they didn't want me to kind of help them with LinkedIn. And then that shifted quickly because now all of a sudden everyone's home and they all want to work on Zoom and they all are interested in like an hour weekly call with a younger person. People, I got feedback from new clients that would say, this is like the best part of my week, right? Getting to like build a relationship. And at that point in time, as sad as it is, like that's true.
Wow.
And so it did shift, but you gotta, you know, build the well before you're thirsty. And so I was,
so true, that's good.
So I was doing that. I kind of got it to a point where I had two incomes. I had my corporate income, and then I was double dipping because I was helping people network on LinkedIn.
So, okay, so you reach out to somebody on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is part of your secret. Well, what do you say?
No, go for it.
Like, what do you just show up in somebody's inbox like, yo, what's up? I mean, what is that like?
Yeah. You know, it shifted over time because the mechanics of it. Because what worked in 2018 doesn't really work that way today, especially because there's some more people on it. But you know, the nature of it is I always like to think of it networking over sales. So I don't go in with the expectations that I'm gonna like necessarily sell something. I go in with the expectation, you know, a lot of times people say marketing, oh, it's a numbers game. I say, okay, it's a people game, right? So if you want to actually show curiosity and interest in like what they're doing, what they're working on, and making it about them, then you can find people who are willing to share. And then from there, you can figure out if there's a way to kind of provide them some value. Yeah. And so for me, then it became, well, what's the value?
Okay.
You know, and
and you gotta get to that. Yeah.
Right. So for me, the way that I started was copywriting. So I would help people share their story on their LinkedIn profile. And I found that was something that people were interested in saying yes to, because there was a beginning, a middle, and an end. It wasn't like a pay me all this money forever.
Yeah.
It was like you could charge like a set price that we would go through a, interview style thing on Zoom.
Sure.
I would record it, and then I would try to write based off of what they said. I was using like transcription software and kind of like putting it together to feed back to them to say, hey, does this make you, like, what do you think of this? I would help them with their positioning, because I found that what wound up happening is I would get people on a call and they would tell me their story. And this still happens where I'm just like, I did research on you and that is not up there online.
Nobody knows that.
Yeah, nobody knows that. And they'd be like, yeah, I know. And that's where it was like, well, can I help you explain that?
It's so important though, right? Because I think people are starting to recognize the importance of a personal brand. Right? Because you exist online only as what people see, right?
Yeah.
So there's like your head, right? Or whatever that is, and whatever your blurb is, and then that becomes who you are.
Exactly. And so what I found on LinkedIn specifically, and why I kind of like was doing how it kind of worked, was people were treating it like a job resume platform. So they kind of set it up 5 years ago and they kind of had some context over their career, but they weren't positioning themselves as a way to make it easier to network so they would attract the people that they want. So if you start talking about you're an executive and like this is what you do, but then when I got you on a call and you're like, hey, I'm trying to sell this product. And it's like, well, like, say that. Like explain what the product is, because your conversion rates are going to go up a lot easier when you reach out to somebody if you're making it easy for them to understand what's in it for them. Right. So, right? So once you say that, it's like people would be like, oh yeah, I get it. And then I could sell a service.
So you're on LinkedIn, and so your company now, right? So you help them in that space with the branding, but also with the e-commerce part, right? So setting that up, so there's a back end and all of that to it as well.
Yeah. So what wound up happening to kind of progress the story is I found some clients who then would start asking me the question of what else can you do for me?
Yes.
Right. So that it kind of, going back to like when you have a lot of skill sets, people start asking me what else I could do. And then that turned into me doing more on LinkedIn, managing their account for them, helping them build up themselves up as thought leaders. And so, so that became, helping them create content, helping them reach out to people, use LinkedIn Sales Navigator, like some of the premium products of LinkedIn, and just kind of do that.
And I know a bunch of people that are, whether they're at the point in their career where they're thinking about their exit plan, right? They've had these 20, 30 years and they've got deep expertise, and whether it's leadership or some, supply chain or whatever. And they're thinking about, man, how do I leverage that into something else and being a thought leader? So I think there's a ton of people watching this that are going to reach out to you because they're like, I've been trying to figure out how to do that, but obviously you have a system for it.
Yeah. So what happened was I was always interested in LinkedIn, but then it became my thought process at that point, and why I quit my job was like, okay, how do I help more people with this? Because it's hard to scale a service business, because especially, doing it for people is not as scalable as helping people do it, help them, teach them how to do it for themselves.
Right.
And so what I did was I started designing software to kind of bring some sales tools to LinkedIn that were helpful. I viewed it as like kind of scratching my own itch, because I discovered a lot of like user experience problems, and I had the background of project management on web development to kind of put something together for software. But that's when I quit my job at Bloomingdales to try to go on this journey of building software around LinkedIn.
Wow.
And I quit my job. I put all of my New York rent into software. I did digital nomad life for 2 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And then this last year is when I moved back to Atlanta to tap into the tech scene, because I made a lot of progress on it. But I wanted to kind of build in Atlanta.
Yeah,
I felt like
and have
it was
that
the right
community and everything
exactly,
around
because when you're doing this with people all over the world in different time zones, it's doable, but it's isolating, it's lonely.
Yeah.
And I started looking at it when I was on the beaches of Thailand and Costa Rica, kind of like pondering what I'm going to do next.
Yeah.
It was like, you know what? I think it's time to go home, because I want to build with community here and help more people and like spread this message around like LinkedIn as an entrepreneurial vehicle.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I moved back here last year.
Wow. So, as I listen to you talk about your, and look, I think we just got to have you come back, right? So we can have another conversation. Yeah. But when I think about, your whole journey, and I'm thinking about, the fact that it seems like for you, you have at each stage been very clear of what's important to you, what your core values are, what drives you, how you want to have your posture out in the world, right? Being able to excel, being able to help people. Having fun, collaboration, community, continuous learning, all of those things. And you've taken the steps at, every time the world changes to recalibrate and say, all right, what's the change? How do I respond to that? How do I reposition myself? And then rethink that and then make sure I'm heading toward my purpose. And I think that is a key thing that is really important to a lot of people that are looking at this, because it seems like you've been able to escape ever being like truly, fully burned out. And so I would, I'd be interested, like we'll stay connected, of course, but as you continue this journey, right, building software, that's a huge undertaking itself, right? And especially with LinkedIn, but we'll hear more about it next time. I know we're kind of getting to the end here, but I want to thank you for coming.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's one question I ask all my guests.
Yeah, go for it.
So of course here at The Passionate Pro, we're all about bringing your passion to work. What would you tell someone that is struggling with finding their passion?
I just want to kind of say, I guess, what worked for me. I would say that when I went from law school to like that first chapter in my career up until I was about like 30-ish or so, I strove to be happy. That was kind of like, what do I like to do, right? Going back to like what I don't like to do, what do I like to do? When I got all those things and I was happy, I had all the things that I hoped for, but I felt unfulfilled. And I feel like in the new chapter, which is where I feel like I really found my passion, is I kind of changed my North Star to be more like, how do I, instead of being happy, how do I be of use? Yeah. And I felt like out of being of use to clients, to people, I find more passion in helping people than I care about LinkedIn or sales or systems management. The mechanics of all this stuff, I'm, to be honest, not that passionate about it. But when I help somebody share their story or get a conversion, I find joy in those moments. And so I would say to anybody to kind of focus less on just being happy and focus more on doubling down on what you're good at and what can be of use to other people. And if you can do that, I feel like passion kind of derives from helping other people.
That's awesome. Colin, thanks so much. I've enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. It was great to meet you.
Likewise. Man, that was such an awesome conversation with Colin Simon. And I got to tell you, I could have talked to him for another hour to really get deep on what he's doing in LinkedIn. But check out his profile, Colin Simon, on LinkedIn. You can connect with him and get a hold of all of his services. The thing that resonated to me, though, was that Colin has always been clear on what his core values are, and he's allowed those to drive him. And you'll notice that he's already recalibrated 3 or 4 times in his lifetime to make sure that he's constantly keeping those core values at the forefront. And that's the thing that I want you to take from today. Make sure that you define those core values, that you know what they are, and that you are staying true to them. Because if you do that, you'll just navigate your way through a life that's going to keep you happy and in passion and with your purpose. We'll see you next time on the Passionate Pro Podcast.